August 12th marks the 23rd International Youth Day, where we celebrate the potential and power of young people to shape the future of our increasingly interconnected world. With half of the global population under the age of 30, young generations will find solutions to some of our toughest global challenges. However, even before the pandemic, the world was facing a youth employment crisis, with millions of young women and men excluded by the global economy from pathways to decent employment. I'm here with Dan Crerand, who is the Global Program Head of CEO for 1 Month, an initiative that offers young people the possibility to develop and showcase their potential, to learn what it takes to succeed as a business leader, and to acquire the skills and the experience needed to get a foot on the career ladder. It's an interactive internship with no barriers around education or skill set requirements. Dan, thank you for joining.
Yeah, thanks for the welcome. Thanks for having me. I have the privilege of being the global program head for our early careers program. Prior to that, very much heavily working in the early careers and social purpose space, maybe for the last 6 to 7 years, very much a passion project. And that can be working with educational institutions or candidate-facing platforms where I get a true picture of what the issues the next gen of talent are facing. Or secondly, and something I really love, is giving this kind of valuable intel or FaceTime and using it to communicate with our clients here in the Adecco Group, helping them to define their early career strategy, what these candidates want, how we can find them, where we can find them, and when I can pass on my information, it's in the best interests of the future workforce.
Wow, amazing. And so, as you said, your role leading the program really kind of gives you a unique perspective into today's youth and their drivers when searching for employment opportunities. So I'm curious, what are some of the common themes the youth of today share with you is important to them when looking for roles?
Yeah, it's the million-dollar question. I think even without getting into specifics of what they want from a role, the logistics, I think Gen Z candidates, they have super high expectations for their current or future employers, for organizations. I think they see us as an important vehicle who can have an impact on issues such as diversification, social impact, environmental issues, sustainability, etc. And they feel we have a massive kind of span of influence. They feel whether that's through personal development, whether it's through employee workload, our products and services towards our customers. I've seen them make decisions solely based on the kind of ethical values of a company. And when I say they deep dive, they will look to see if what you're saying you're committing to is actually committed to action in the operations of your business. I would say from a granular perspective, they want a clear development plan. They want a company that, well, I think in many instances, I've seen a lot of companies do a lot of work around front loading, trying to put all their time and money into finding the best candidates. But with this generation, the kind of brand, the business of the benefits is no longer enough. They want an internal mobility route for themselves, so that they can see there is a future path here of continuous learning. They can get meaningful work. I think that's really crucial for them in this stage of their career. I think the one bit to call out is they are very entrepreneurial. I think Forbes has said around 54% of the people are entrepreneurial. They want this meaningful work where they're trusted with responsibility on special projects, where they'll have an impact, where they'll develop skills and keep learning. I think 1 in 5 Gen Z candidates would stay at an employer they were teetering on leaving if they offered them a chance to upskill. So that's really crucial for their next gen, is to see that there is a continuous learning path and a future for them in that business.
Mm. Mm. And so if we think about some of the things that motivate the youth of today to look for roles, what would you consider being some of the major factors influencing youth unemployment?
I think it's a really big discussion point. I think unemployment is certainly up and down over the last few years. I think the recessional activity is really making it difficult. COVID obviously was not helpful. There was a lot of postponed internships and graduate programs, et cetera. I think the challenge with youth unemployment right now, and something they've really got to face, is the fact that sometimes an intern or a grad coming in is seen as a continuous improvement for a business. It's kind of seen as a bit of a value add type addition to a business rather than a necessity. So for me, I've always seen early careers hires as the bedrock, the foundation of a business. You've got these people with new ideas, technologically minded, and brought up in this technology first world. but they have been brought up in a pandemic. They have spent a lot of their final studies in a virtual environment. And where businesses are now going through a real transition, a position of change, sometimes that they will go for the experienced hires. They will not have the time to ride the storm and bring in the early careers hires. And I think that's kind of where it's wrong. Um, in the media, kind of in the press, you probably see it quite a lot. For some reason, one of the things that's really hindering youth unemployment at the minute is the fact that we're getting sucked into a lot of terminology around things like Mickey Mouse degrees, or should you go to uni, should you not go to uni, should you do an apprenticeship, what is the point of doing certain things, etc., etc. So many people have these differing views. There's also stuff around paid internships and internships and youth expectations and behaviors. And unfortunately, this negative association isn't fair, it isn't correct, but it is there, and it is kind of generating some of these incorrect perceptions of youth employment. But one thing I would say is there is a whole, I talked about entrepreneurship, and I think there is a whole group of people in this population. And I have spoken to business leaders in the past who see that as a bit of a fear factor, because they maybe think to themselves, do I want to bring somebody in who's then going to run off and go and start their own business or create something of their own? And it's a bit like, I think past that, I think past what an entrepreneur is. If that person has that ability, they've got critical thinking, strategic planning and hard work and dedication, usually strong comms, probably good in sales, probably very creative. I could go on and on and on. But the reality of the situation is if they do leave to start their own business, for some, it can be a side hustle alongside their kind of core employment. Or if they do formally leave, and this is the bit where maybe I differ, but if that is in 2, 3, 5, or 10 years, I'm looking at that and going, that's 2 to 3 to 5 years of a budding entrepreneur that you have in your business, someone that's got this really innovative way of thinking. It's about finding a role for them and convincing them to stay in your organization. So I think that's one of the biggest factors as well, is that there's these little groups that are appearing and they're putting companies off employing, but the reality is they need to become the bedrock of their businesses.
Well, that's really interesting. And you kind of lead nicely into my next question, which was, I read a report from the World Economic Forum that suggests in 2022, almost 1 in 4 of all young people were not in education, employment, or training. So that's known as NEET status. And the youth NEET rate jumped to its highest in almost 15 years. So as a consequence, young people may not see their labor market opportunities and their outcomes deteriorate in the longer term. And then they've referred to this as scarring. What do you think businesses should play, or what role do you think businesses should play in opening opportunities for these NEET youth when looking for internships or entry-level jobs? Or do you think that responsibility should fall elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a concern, I think, because you say 25% of people impacted. I think even higher levels in extremely poor, kind of fragile economic countries. We do have an impact for sure. I think it'll be kind of ill-advised to not say we do. So do policymakers, so do local authorities. I think even what sits behind that 25% number is that there's an even bigger difference in terms of the gender differentiation between within that network. I think 15% difference between kind of male and female alone in terms of reported figures. So that was supposed to be kind of averse, I suppose, by bringing in the platinum economy. So the digitalization was something which was going to help protect that. But obviously, as we know, there may still be a reduction in jobs around that. But for me, it's about going right to the core of the education. Something I'm really passionate about. I think the education doesn't always match for those young people at that point in their career. I think their behaviors or their interests don't align. They maybe had less access through their kind of parental network or their opportunities as they grew up. We need to kind of desperately increase the awareness of more roles and more careers. Just because someone never related to Macbeth or Pythagoras doesn't mean they're unemployable. Obviously, sorry to the mathematics wizards and the readers, but that's a fact. I think, how do we better showcase these hidden and potentially skill short sectors, or open our doors to more opportunities for people to live the day in the life of a global program head, for example, or a transformation manager? How do we get these roles that are not talked about enough? There are people coming out of education, even at graduate level, your kind of liberal art students, your journalists, your graphic designers, for example, struggling to get work. But are they ever told that, you know what, that's a very useful skill set to have to be a UX designer, for example?
Yeah.
I don't think they are. If you're really interested in sustainability, like we see in the media very often, a lot of young people are, why aren't we getting them into things like solar panels and energy management? And these are things that they are just simply not as aware of coming through education. And I just think that's kind of on us to do something with that. I think, can they, as educational institutions, revise the curriculum? Does that sit with us employers? I've worked with these education institutions before. They are very hardworking. They care so much, but they are huge institutions with massive student bases, and they're struggling to give them this kind of advice. It's really, really difficult for them to do so. But I think between us, I think between businesses and education, we need to think outside the norm. There's something that's kind of really interesting for me. A couple of little bits I would look at personally. One, which would be, is can we use the likes of AI to give people a feel of what jobs are like going for education, what it's like to be in an office, what it's like to be going out fitting a solar panel fitter, whatever it may be. Is there something we can do to give them a taste of these different jobs? And then the second bit is something I worked on a little bit over the last couple of years, which is trying to connect with the Guardian network, the parental network, reach out to these groups of high influence people who are trying to advise their children in terms of what to do next, and maybe just simply haven't had access themselves. Like, how can we help them to then invigorate these jobs and find the meaningful, gratifying roles out there? The likes of healthcare and catering, food and drink, the bedrocks of our society, but they're now struggling to find people. We need to find ways to kind of counter that in many respects. That would be the main thing I would look at, to be honest.
Hmm. No, I love that. Thinking about the hidden skill sets and how we can showcase them. I mean, I know if I was in school at that time, I would have loved to be able to visualize what my day would look like post education. You don't get that chance. So, I mean, unless you have conversations with people who have been in that role, but even then, perspective and experience is very unique to that individual. So,
Yeah.
I think you're onto something there.
Yeah, I might be on Dragon's Den over the next couple of years with that idea, to be honest.
Yeah. Um, well, moving on to my next question, it is around this new analysis of labor market data that shows the number of NEET young people reporting a mental health problem has increased from 11% in 2011 to 30% in 2022. Do you think that businesses should be developing strategies to support young people who are entering the job market and identifying with a mental health condition?
Great question. Of course, incredibly relevant. Obviously, I'm no expert in this field, but I'll give my thoughts from a personal perspective. I think working in youth recruitment for the last few years, obviously, I didn't know those exact figures that you just shared with me, but it doesn't surprise me. I think this is a population of people who might be moving cities, countries, sitting in their first face-to-face role in an office, daunted by like lots of new experiences, especially those people who did finish their education in a virtual environment. So certainly we do. Before I answer it, I suppose I'm a bit half full glass kind of guy in many respects. I would look at it and go, the talent I've worked with post-pandemic, I've seen such a noticeable difference. I think in the past, I've seen interns and grads sit on problems and not share problems and feel like they cannot share something with their manager, maybe because they feel as if that will go against their chance to get in a permanent role or a position in the graduate program. And they sit there and these problems kind of escalate. Whereas now, I fast forward 2023, I have the luxury of working with these fantastic individuals. The talent I speak to, they're open, they are afraid to show and trust you with their vulnerabilities. If their workload's too much, they're more likely to raise it. So I think those numbers can go either way. Maybe it's even the transparency of some managers, some senior leaders, businesses leading with this authenticity, encouraging people to forget about perfectionism. I needed to do it myself. I was always too keen to be a perfectionist. Maybe it's the fact that business committing to mental health and well-being are all kind of raising these numbers too, to be more aware. But yeah, of course, we do need to look at it in terms of the transfer to virtual environments. I think one way I always describe this is just that if I knew one of my team were having a bad day, I probably could find that out from looking across the desk or as they grabbed a coffee or if they disappeared. Those opportunities are less frequent to kind of tell someone's having a really bad day. So many kind of young talents I'm speaking to, they are worried about the potential impact on their career, their pay, the progression of AI and kind of the transition post-pandemic. I think personally, again, speaking, one thing I found really helpful for my clients in the intern space was that we created a wellbeing and engagement manager, which was fantastic. It gave us this new outlet, somebody that was detached from the normal HR, hiring manager, decision maker role. Somebody I brought in, maybe they were there as a kind of middle ground, I suppose, between both parties. The intern could speak to them about themselves, their personal circumstances, with no concern of a link to performance management, etc., etc. They would run well-being events. They would have a virtual open door, etc. It was just about opening these opportunities to allow people to speak,
Right.
and we got some kind of really, really great feedback off it. Just to answer your question, kind of close it down. I appreciate that was quite a long first part of it, but I would say, yes, we need to drive this kind of working environment in a changing world. I think we were never, well, I personally was an office person 5 days a week. During the pandemic, all of a sudden I became a virtual manager where I managed my team majority of the days from home. We're all brand new to this, so I'm appreciative of the fact it's not easy and we're getting there. The steer I would take from the last 2, 3 years of managing early careers or colleagues in general would be just to be real, kind of vulnerable and transparent. Leaders who encourage their team to be like that are more likely to share their honest appraisals themselves. Share the healthy models, not always healthy here, but when I am, I will share it. I think if I'm having a walk on lunch or taking a call whilst I'm out walking, for example, practice self-care, obviously, it's going to be something which is going to help them. Things like holiday management. I used to be really bad for sending emails late at night to my team who come in the next day at 9 a.m. and have this barrage of emails because I like to work in the evenings. Instead, I use a simple delay timer just to make them a little bit more comfortable and feel like they're not getting bombarded overnight every day. And show flexibility. The big one for me, I would say on top of that, is the check-in piece. And I think this sounds really kind of might not be applicable for all businesses, but for me, we used to have those old-fashioned water cooler conversations, or your manager would sit on your desk, can I talk to you about this for 2 minutes? And you would never really think too much about it. We all now have our diaries full of Teams meetings and client calls, all kind of addressed across your diary, and you have emails and you get your Teams notifications and your Zoom notifications. And one thing I personally don't see a lot of is the phone element does not go off very often. And when it does, you have a missed call in Teams. There's people that would often say to me, they're like, oh, why is that call going off? Why makes them anxious? What's wrong? Why am I getting called rather than a Teams or an email or on the meetings? And that's the bit which I think is misplaced, because that water cooler meter might have just been your boss sitting there with a smile on his face or her face talking to you about something in business, or just you yourself. But instead, if they do that over Teams, it's seen as strange. So I'm encouraging people to be a bit more open with that. Give your kind of teams a call. How was the Formula One? Did you go and watch Barbie or Oppenheimer? What did you do at the weekend? Get back to this kind of new style of engagement we have, and find your kind of new way of working with your teams, because those 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes a week could be the difference between their well-being being supported or not, because they feel as if it's not just this kind of transactional relationship.
Yeah, no, I have to say from my personal experience, I would agree with that. It's nice to get to know your colleagues, your boss, your leadership on a personal level, aside from just the demands of everyday working career. So I agree. And a lot of conversations I'm hearing these days are around this idea of social health and the empathetic leader, kind of showing that it's okay to feel things beyond just the ticking the box of you've achieved this, you've achieved that, you didn't do this. So yeah, I would say that on a personal level, I definitely agree with the things that you've suggested. There's research by the World Economic Forum. I know I'm referring to this quite a bit, but it suggests that the opportunities for upward social mobility and economic advancement are increasingly limited, even more so than pre-pandemic, for the underprivileged youth of today. The research shows how far opportunities are still determined by background and predicts a fall in income mobility for young people, driven particularly by the pandemic, especially those children who lost out on hours of school learning during lockdown. and more recently, the cost of living crisis. So, on a personal level, I believe businesses should have an important role to play in boosting social mobility for the younger generations. Companies sort of have the power to remove these barriers against those from the less advantaged backgrounds, and make sure that everyone has access to the same opportunities. And I think in some of the answers, you kind of hinted and highlighted some of the ways in which they can do that. But aside from what you said before, are there other actionable insights that you think companies can incorporate to promote or drive social mobility in their organizations?
Yeah, it's really important for me personally. Got my chance to run my own global program and made it as inclusive as possible in terms of no kind of educational parameters, no skill set parameters. But for me as businesses, I think, look, we all know it's on the agenda. I think you've got to lead from the front. It's going to take time. Take time to look at your own business story, your value commitments, articulate kind of why you want to be driving these social improvements. And make them kind of practical and realistic in terms of the adjustments. It's not going to happen overnight. There's
Yeah.
other challenges that are happening. I think that's where I think people try and look for the showstopper when the practical and the realistic is probably better. There's such an opportunity to kind of get out there. I think good example for me, I went and spoke to a few universities, probably last year, I think it was. Getting out and getting that face time with them was really important for me to actually see, because they are obviously hearing these stories about companies wanting to be better around social purpose. And they are a university maybe that has higher proportion of students from maybe low to medium socioeconomic backgrounds, in terms of kind of finance, health, social resources, etc. And they were so disappointed in terms of they heard these companies kind of making these commitments, but they never saw them. They had similar, very local companies. They weren't seeing the big players or the more kind of heard about organizations coming from outside of their core units, which are not in those towns and cities. They were quite far advanced in terms of travel. And they had this no support, whether it was kind of face to face or virtual. And the virtual piece for me is an absolute no brainer. It's an opportunity for us to extend on that. So I think we just need to ensure we're doing what we can to be leveling up. We're in a really kind of luxurious position here, being in the HR recruitment field. We have so much to offer these organizations, especially. We know what good looks like. We know that these people have skills come out of education sometimes, and we know what it takes to get that job. And we have such a powerful position to be in a good way. And I think we as organizations can do more around that. In terms of the kind of logistics, again, of little things, I would say openly advertise outside of the normal routes where possible. I think that is more and more important nowadays. Ensure your organization, if it's super diverse and you're really pleased with what you're doing, like share that. Make sure your interviewing panel are fair and diverse. Same applies for your kind of websites and your social medias. Just make sure you're painting a really good picture on these channels, because sometimes, and too often, I would see it with young talent. They will look at a website or they'll look at an organization and they will sit down and say, do you know what? I'm not dressed like that, or I'm not as confident as that. They speak differently to me. I'm not as confident as that, etc., etc. So them self opting out of processes is the biggest no-no in this whole situation. That's where it's all going wrong. And if something like that happens on something like a website or something, so something as kind of basic and so equally as consistent for all candidates, it shouldn't really be the case. Just thinking about my own processes, just try and give as many layers to the process as possible in terms of opportunities to interact and integrate with your candidates. Remember, it's not just about us selecting them, it's about us allowing them to select us. It's not always one way nowadays in recruitment, it's about both ways. And I've spoken about it before. I think the upskilling opportunities is quite a big one. I think if you look at a lot of stats out there in the market, and I don't have them to hand, but if you compare organizations' investment into postgraduates versus school leavers, there is a huge difference in terms of who gets offered the upskilling, which to me is again the wrong way around. It should be upskilling offered to people irrelevant of their kind of educational background. And then lastly, with all these requirements, just never forget, it's one thing to get this kind of high potential people into your business, but that needs to continue. I said before, it was all about front loading. Too often I would see it where we spend a lot of money on attraction, they come into your business and they are themselves. They need to feel welcome to be their true self in that organization, and then they're more likely to kind of stay.
Yeah. Wow, you have such a wealth of knowledge, and I think that anyone hearing this conversation will be able to take away a lot of tangible things that you've shared to increase their investment in the youth of today. So, just to wrap this up, and thank you again for all of your
Thanks.
insights that you've shared with us today. If there was one thing that you could encourage businesses to do today or tomorrow, that would have the most impact when developing their youth employment strategies, what do you think that or hope that they would consider?
Yeah, so you said I am going to push the extremities of the one
Do it.
here. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would just say, look, I would say that they have to look outside the normal and think differently to before. One thing I kind of always say, and it might be cheesy, but if you always do what you always did, you will always get what you always got, and that is what we see a lot in the early careers market. A lot of similar traditional methods.
Hmm.
You cannot change these results or change the impact if you're not going to change something majorly in your processes. So this generation, largely Gen Z, they're operating and behaving so much differently to other generations. So we need to be continuously improving to incorporate them, to impress them, to attract them. They are the most diverse generation coming through. What a massive kind of reason to advocate for bringing in this talent now is that you're bringing the most diverse group of people to replace the least diverse group of people who will be exiting the business over the next few years. But in terms of the kind of one and the quick wins, I would say I mentioned it earlier. I think things like removal of unpaid internships, I think is probably quite important in the market now.
Hmm.
They obviously have a full value of their time. Careers days, I think if you're a big city employer, can you open these out to more people, whether that's virtually or support with things like expenses? So I know a lot of people coming from 300 miles away in certain countries just would have to pay for it themselves to attend these careers days, careers events to network. And that to me, all of a sudden goes back to that question around the kind of social mobility
Yeah.
piece. Allow those from these less privileged positions to attend is really important if you want to see something change in your organization. Perhaps even consider fully virtual internships. We know they've been successful during COVID. They worked. We know you want to get them back into the office because they bring such a buzz into your office, and I completely appreciate that. But is there an opportunity, whether it's a 1 week internship, 1 week work experience, try and find a way maybe to bring people in fully virtually, because there are a lot of people out there with different circumstances around kind of looking after parents, family members. They might be working other jobs, which makes it more difficult to move down for these periods. Try and find a way, and that way you'll truly end up with a diverse set of people. Make it easier for candidates. We know you come into an interview, anyone who's interviewed before has probably been told that they have researched your business, and they probably did. But don't rely on them having to research your business and go and find your About Us section and be able to come in and give you some stats. You should be just showing your business off every day on your social media, every job advertisement, every job description, your websites, your events. That is your outlet for this future talent. It's not going to be on your About Us section if you really want to get this next gen of talent because they are thinking themselves outside the box. And then probably to close, I would simply say, and this is paramount to all businesses. We include ourselves in this one. Do not waste this talent. This is a big and obvious challenge all companies probably need to really change the culture on. So, are you asking your applicants for what you really need from them, or are you asking for what you always usually ask for in this job description, or what a
Hmm.
hiring manager usually wants? Like, look at those list of skills and responsibilities and what is essential and what's not. If you're always backfilling, constantly hiring, then maybe it's now time to think about what you need. If it's not what you need, if there's something on there that you can remove, then remove it. I think removing yet another barrier keeps your talent pool, your pipeline, whatever you want to call it, as large as possible. Start getting your hiring managers to be a bit more open-minded and keep that talent pool as wide as they can, because if they do that, you're going to get a different level of talent again. And what we've done for a lot of my clients in the past is bring them into the role. If it's not essential immediately, that's something they can pick up working side by side or with a mentor over the next kind of 1, 2, 3, 6 months.
Oh, wow, Dan, thank you so much.
Problem.
I learned a lot during this, and I think it's really special that there are people like you that are investing in the youth of today. And so Thank you again for participating. And to those of you who have tuned in, I hope that you found as much value in this conversation as I have, and that this will act as a reminder to commemorate the energetic spirit of young people worldwide and their ability to improve the future.